Okay, let's talk about a name you've almost definitely heard, John Locke. He's one of those titans of philosophy, a thinker whose ideas about freedom, rights, and government pretty much laid the foundation for the modern world. Seriously, from the American Revolution to how democracies are structured today, his fingerprints are everywhere. But here's the twist. The man who basically wrote the rulebook for liberty was also deeply, deeply tangled in its exact opposite.
And that's really the heart of the issue, isn't it? It's the huge contradiction at the center of his legacy that we have to wrestle with. How on earth did the philosopher, who so powerfully argued for our right to liberty, also help build and profit from one of the most brutal systems of enslavement in history? That's the paradox we're going to dig into.
So to even begin to understand the man, you really have to understand the world he was born into. John Locke arrived in 1632, smack in the middle of the chaos of the English Civil War. His dad was a lawyer and a captain in the army fighting against the king. So right from the get-go, he's growing up in this Puritan household that's all about religious discipline and pushing back against absolute, unchecked power. You can see how that would shape a person.
Now, Locke's first major bombshell was in the world of psychology. At the time, most people believed we were born with certain ideas already baked into our brains. Locke said, nope, not buying it. He came up with this concept of tabula rasa, which is Latin for blank slate. He argued that the mind at birth is like an empty piece of paper, and everything we become, everything we know, it's all written on that paper by our experiences.
This idea put him on a total collision course with his education at Oxford. See, the university was all about teaching old-school philosophy, based on ancient texts and tradition. Locke found it completely stale. He was drawn to the radical new stuff, what they called natural philosophy, but what we just call science. He wanted to learn from observation and real-world experience, not just from dusty old books. This whole shift is known as empiricism, and it was a game-changer.
Locke's life took a really sharp turn when he moved out of the university's ivory tower and into the corridors of political power. And this whole transition from quiet scholar to a major political player was pretty much thanks to one person, the very powerful and very controversial Earl of Shaftesbury. He became Locke's boss, his patient, and his partner in politics.
I mean, just look at this timeline. Locke's entire life was defined by political chaos. He's born during a war, and his career just follows that pattern. But check out that key turning point in 1667. That's when he links up with Shaftesbury. This relationship plunges him right into the deep end of high-stakes politics, and it eventually leads to him being accused of treason and having to flee the country in 1683.
You know, it's kind of ironic. This period of incredible danger, when he's basically a fugitive on the run, was also his most creative. Hiding out in the Netherlands, a wanted man, Locke put all of his revolutionary ideas down on paper. It was right there, in exile, with everything on the line, that he wrote the books that would literally change the world. So, when the political wind shifted back in England with the Glorious Revolution of 1688, it was finally safe for Locke to come home. And he didn't come back quietly. He unleashed those ideas he'd been working on in exile, publishing his 2 treatises of government. And this was nothing less than a blueprint for a whole new kind of world, built on 2 massive ideas, natural rights and the social contract.
Locke's first big idea was absolutely revolutionary. He said we are all born with certain rights that can't be taken away. These aren't gifts from a king or a government, they're just part of being human. He famously defined them as the right to life, liberty, and property. And get this, the only legitimate job of a government, he argued, isn't to give us these rights, but to protect them.
Okay, so that leads to the next big question. If we have these rights naturally, why do we even need governments? Locke's answer was the social contract. He said, imagine a state of nature. Everyone's free, sure, but our rights aren't very secure. So we all voluntarily agree, we give our consent to form a government. But it's a limited government. It's just a trustee for our rights. And here's the real kicker. If that government breaks the deal and becomes a tyrant, the people have the absolute right to get rid of it. This quote just nails his core belief perfectly. For Locke, law and freedom were not opposites. He thought a good government doesn't take freedom away, it actually makes real freedom possible by creating a safe, predictable system where everyone's rights are protected. In his view, law is the framework that holds liberty up.
All right, but now we have to turn to the most difficult, most disturbing part of Locke's story. We have to face this massive, gaping canyon between the incredible ideals he wrote about and the reality of his own actions and financial investments.
I mean, this just lays the contradiction out there plain as day. In his philosophy, Locke says slavery is only okay for prisoners taken in a just war.
a very, very specific exception. He insists that freedom from absolute power is a fundamental natural right, but then you look at his actions. He helped write a constitution for the colony of Carolina that made hereditary slavery the law of the land. And he personally invested in the Royal African Company, which was a major player in the slave trade.
And there is just no way to soften this. This is a direct quote from the Fundamental Constitutions of Carolina, a document Locke had a hand in writing. It gives every freeman absolute power and authority. It uses the exact words, absolute power, that his philosophy was designed to fight against. The hypocrisy is just staggering.
And yet, and this is what's so wild, despite this massive contradiction, it was Locke's words about liberty, not his actions on slavery, that ended up lighting the fuse for the American Revolution. The founders of the United States were, in many ways, his star pupils.
I mean, the connection is just impossible to miss. When you put the words side by side like this, you can see that Thomas Jefferson practically channeled John Locke when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, he famously tweaked property to the more inspiring pursuit of happiness, but the core logic, the argument for revolution, it is pure Locke, through and through. And these ideas didn't stay in the halls of philosophy, they spread like wildfire. Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense, which was basically Locke for the masses, sold over 100,000 copies in just a few months. That's an insane number for the time. It took these big ideas about rights and revolution and put them in plain language that everyone could understand, firing people up for the war.
And his influence didn't stop at the Declaration. When it came time to actually build a new government, guys like James Madison went right back to Locke's playbook. His ideas about a limited government with separate branches and checks and balances to keep anyone from getting too powerful, that's baked right into the DNA of the U.S. Constitution.
So we're left with this really complicated legacy. You absolutely cannot deny the power of John Locke's vision for a free society. His ideas were a gift to humanity. But you also can't deny his personal involvement in a system that so brutally violated every single one of those ideals. And that leaves us with a huge question. How do we celebrate the ideas that built our world while being honest about the deep, profound flaws of the man who wrote them? That, I think, is a question we all have to keep asking.